This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Carl Tatz Design, and iZotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through iZotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
Different mix engineers have different styles, the way they mix and the way they present their music to me. And, you learn what those characteristics are, and you learn how to work and shape all those mixes to make it so that not only the mix engineer and producer is happy, but the people at the label and the end listener is loving it also.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. If you are rocking a Mac Mini M1 in your studio, then you should definitely check out the new OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution. It's the perfect size to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or old Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 complementer, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Randy LeRoy, a musician, engineer, A&R, and mastering engineer in Nashville, Tennessee, and Takoma Park, Maryland. A graduate of the recording program at Middle Tennessee State University, which is also my alma mater, he got his first gig cutting publishing demos on Nashville's Music Row in CBS Song's basement studio, editing radio spots on quarter-inch tape for a company called Starliners, and hanging out in small studios around town. Eventually, he was offered a job with CBS Records as an A&R coordinator and spent time in high-end facilities like Emerald, Stargem, The Doghouse, Masterfonics, Sound Shop, Treasure Isle, Studio 19, and even legendary studios like the Record Plant in LA while working for CBS. Randy worked a variety of the label's many noteworthy artists such as Ray Benson, George Jones, Ricky Van Shelton, Tammy Wynette, Vern Gosdin, and Exile. And in 1988, Glenn Meadows at Masterfonics offered him a job as his mastering assistant. I'm kind of rewinding the clock here, where Randy learned how to cut reference lacquers, assemble and quality checking masters, and help out engineers during mixing while mastering small projects on his own. At Masterfonics, he would work alongside notable country music producers like Jimmy Bowen, Tony Brown, James Stroud, Jerry Crutchfield, and Barry Beckett. And in 91, Randy left Masterfonics to start his own mastering studio, Final Stage Mastering, located in Soundstage on Music Row, right here in Nashville, where he worked on more Grammy-nominated and winning projects through the 90s and 2000s, such as Reliant K's Two Lefts Don't Make a Right, but Three Do. And in 2010, Randy left Nashville to become the senior mastering engineer at Tonal Park in Takoma Park, Maryland, where he has mastered some of the biggest names in country, bluegrass, folk, Americana, and gospel, like Jim Lauderdale, Brian Sutton, Jamie Johnson, including the 2020 Grammy-winning Michael Cleveland's Tall Fiddler and 2 other Grammy-nominated albums in the Best Bluegrass Album category. Right on. I want to make a big shout out and a thank you to previous guests on the show, Justin Francis, for making our introduction and connecting us. Thank you, Justin. Please welcome Randy LeRoy to Recording Studio Rockstars. Randy, are you ready to rock, dude?
Man, I was born ready, Liz.
Right on, man. Well, it's great to have you here on the show. Justin's been an awesome guest here with us before a couple of times. We really had fun talking about mixing. And I know one of the topics that came up was, just like, the importance of mastering. And I believe you guys have had a chance to work together. Yeah.
Yeah, I've known Justin for a long time. When I was at my stint at Soundstage Studios there in Nashville running the mastering division, Justin came on board downstairs in our recording studios as an intern, started out as an intern downstairs. Man, his know-how and attitude was fantastic. Soon landed him a staff position there doing some assisting, things like that. So, he was still hanging around Soundstage when I left there in 2010. And it's been a really great thing to see somebody like Justin do as well and keep progressing and moving forward like he has. Very well deserved. He's a hustler, and on top of everything else, he's a great engineer.
Right on. Well, you've obviously had quite a lot of experiences. Maybe I'll rewind a little bit. You said you're born ready to rock, but nonetheless, both you and I decided at one point, hey, I think I want to go to a recording school. When were you at MTSU?
Oh, goodness. I moved to Murfreesboro in 1982. There was only a few music business recording programs in the United States at the time. Prior to that, I was at Illinois State University and kind of got involved in music production by running their entertainment committee there, booking concerts, got involved in live show productions and all that kind of stuff. And that was really my introduction into the music business, was through live show production. And I thought, well, that's the way I want to go. I want to get into some form of the music business. And then while I was between the summer of my sophomore and junior years at Illinois State, some friends of mine went up to a studio in Chicago and did some recording and came back and played me their 5 or 6 songs they did. And I was also a musician. And just at that point, it just lit in me. I said, heck with this live stuff. That's a lot of hard work toting all those cases and stuff like that. I'd rather live in a studio. So I started looking for music business programs where I could go on to school with. And back then my choices were like Berkeley, and that was primarily a musician oriented program. You had Middle Tennessee State, and you had Belmont University, and University of Indiana was doing a little bit of stuff back then also. But
what was your instrument?
Guitar. Okay. Grew up playing guitar. And when I decided I wanted to head to the Nashville way, I chose MTSU and moved there in the fall of '82. I entered the program.
Wow. And
back then, there was only, trying to think, like 4 faculty members and the chairman, Jeff Hull. And my primary instructor, good friend Chris Haslew, was the engineering instructor. And
you guys probably had like one studio there?
We did. It was the old original called Haynes House.
Right. Haynes House. I remember the name.
Haynes House. Yep. Had an old Harrison console. It was in an old house, and they did the classes there for all the studio stuff, and that was the recording studio. They started sessions at 4 p.m, and they went all night in 4-hour increments were your labs.
Yeah.
And so, but it was a small program, and it was amazing to see where it's come since then. I mean, here we are some 30 odd years later, and, they've got so many studios, a huge faculty, a huge enrollment in the program, and it's one of the best in the world. So that's
I showed up there a decade after you did, and they had just built a brand new building. I guess for some reason I have the figure $20 million in my head. Like that was the,
Oh, when they opened that communication center, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And, but yeah, they've come a long way, and the program itself has really put out a lot of talented engineers, producers, songwriters, musicians. It's it's a good stop to go and to kind of find yourself with which direction you really want to fit in the music business, being so close to Nashville.
Yeah, well, it was fun to learn all that stuff. I mean, I loved playing guitar. I loved being in bands. I loved playing around with a 4-track and learning a little bit about doing that. But I honestly knew nothing about recording when I went to school down there. I mean, I was so green, I didn't even know that Nashville was like one of the 3, quote, music cities that I might have chosen, I just like, okay, it sounds like a good place to go. Nashville, where is that? I'm from Boston.
Similar to me, I never listened to any country music until I moved to Nashville. I moved there when I was 21, and, I grew up as a child of the 70s, so it was Boston, Styx, and Aerosmith for me, and all of a sudden I got to Nashville and I started learning about George Jones, Tammy Wynette, and Waylon Jennings, and it was a really different experience for me, Didn't know a soul when I headed there, and just went down there, took a leap of faith and said, I'm going for it.
Well, so what was, you've really had some experiences through Nashville. The CBS basement studio sounds like that really gave you a pretty cool start.
Yeah. I mean, my roommate at the time was interning at CBS Songs. So through his contacts there, we started going up into their little 8-track basement studio there in the publishing company, messing around and working on some songs and, working with, some of the stuff he was doing and some of the writers he had met. And it was all, extremely basic. We're talking maybe guitar, vocal, piano, things like that. But it was an in to Nashville. All of a sudden I was, in the community. I was getting to meet people.
And the focus was recording songs, right? So like,
yes.
Just to set it in a framework, I suppose, this is still existing today, of course, but at that point, you write a song, you just record the song outline, and then you collect as many of those and you try and find an artist to go cut it.
Exactly. And it was what was kind of unique about the whole publishing company experience for me was that through CBS Songs, meeting other writers and having other friends, I met a friend of mine named Sonny Tillis, who was Mel Tillis' son. And we'd go over to Cedar Songs down there on, I think it was 18th, if I remember right. And it wasn't uncommon for on a late afternoon, people just to be hanging out there in the offices. And all of a sudden, a few writers are tinkering around with guitars. And all of a sudden, about an hour later, a song's written.
Uh-huh.
And an hour and a half later, they're rolling down into the studio, cutting a work tape of it and things like that, and seeing the development of songs and how songs started from penmanship through ideas and then actually getting them onto tape as a work tape. And then later on, hearing those work tape songs become cut and recorded songs by major country artists, so seeing that whole path of development only inspired me more to want to be a part of the whole recording and music community that was going on there in Nashville.
Yeah. And another takeaway for me is I like you, I wasn't really interested in country music so much. I was more interested in independent rock bands and things like that. But now, years later, I've grown to really appreciate the process of writing a song, putting it together, then going and recording it. And so now, if with what I know, I'd probably love to, go jump into something like that.
It was a different time in country music and in the whole music industry itself in the 80s through the 90s. It was, when I moved to Nashville, there was a lot of work. Country was king.
Yeah.
If you had any ambition and talent in whatever direction you were going, you could probably find work. And it's not like that at all anymore currently there in town.
Sure.
And it's a lot more close-knit because, of course, the whole business model has changed since back then. I mean, in the 80s, a country song would stay number one on radio for 10 to 20 weeks at a time.
Wow.
And so think of the monetary income that the record labels and artists and writers were making with songs and music like that versus today it's maybe number one for a week, 2 weeks at the most, and moving down again and in the rotations. And of course, you don't have sales like you used to. But yeah, it was a completely different model. And Nashville was a great place for myself, being a young kid, to get in there, who was green and just wanted to soak everything in.
Yeah.
It was great times, really good times. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't be, where I am today without the way the doors opened back then, because I don't know if I could make that same direction and path the way the doors are fairly closed. Well, there's just not as many doors to open today as there was back then.
Seems like you got to open your own doors sometimes.
A lot. Yes, you do. You really do. And you were welcomed through those doors back in the early 80s, and that's, and that was a big part of my learning process.
Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always somebody in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Not so with Samply. It's easy to add collaborators to a project so the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. Just upload your voice memo or mix and start collaborating. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. With so many game-changing iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all their plugins through iZotope's affordable subscription bundle, Music Production Suite Pro, for only $19.99 per month? Get your Rockstar extended 30-day free trial subscription now at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Yeah, well, there was definitely a process of, when I got out of school, it was like, all right, I need to get my resume together and I need to go knocking on studio doors and see if I can find an opportunity. And, you have spent time in a lot of different studios: Emerald, Stargem, The Doghouse, Masterfonics, Sound Shop, Treasure Isle, Studio 19. I recognize a number of those from Nashville. I don't know if those are all Nashville, but do you want to give us a little bit, take us down memory lane a little bit about some of these studios,
I will.
What they look like and, how they were set up and stuff like that.
It was, I got exposed to a lot of studios as an A&R coordinator working for CBS Records. Back then, as an A&R coordinator, I was doing anything from running work orders over to studios to being involved running sound at some of our live showcases and guitar polls and things like that. And our in-house producer who was on staff there, Steve Buckingham, when he was in the studio, the door was always open for me. So I could go to these different studios he was working at and, look at the difference of the consoles. You'd have, a big, when I first started going to Emerald, they had a beautiful big Neve in there. And I don't remember which one it was, but it was big and it sounded amazing. The Doghouse, Marshall Morgan's place, he had a Trident console, completely different type of sound than what was going on with the Neves, and so on down the line. Stargem, I forget, he had an old MCI console, if I remember right. So it allowed me exposure, and I just sit in there and listen. That's all I sat in the back, listened and watched. If I got up, occasionally I'd, stand over the engineer's shoulder. He wouldn't mind. And, I'd look to see the layout of the console. Okay, what channels was he putting the drums in? Oh, this guy puts his drums on this side. This other engineer, he's got them over here. Why, I'd ask. I didn't know, just the way they work. I'm right-handed, so that's why I'm put them over there. I'm left-handed, I put them over here, things like that.
Yeah.
So the different rooms, some of them were dead, some of them were live. Some of them had really poor mains, wall monitors. But what I started learning also was that in a lot of recording studios, they're primarily using their near fields or a slightly larger midfield. None of them were using the mains that they had. There were some old JBLs, stuff like that in the walls. And it was real interesting just to see the difference of the way different engineers were recording for isolations in certain rooms, and different instruments from this instrument. And as I was in my young mid-20s, 22, 25, around in there, and just exposed me to all kinds of things. So it was a long time before I started to get to do that stuff on my own.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, I was hanging out in these places and with these engineers, with Steve and other producers that were coming in through CBS. And eventually, the engineer goes, "Hey, go out there and move that mic for me," because they knew that I had an engineering and audio background. And all of a sudden, he's sending me, go put a popper stopper up on that, 47 for me and things like that. So I slowly was getting my acclimation into being, an assistant to some of these engineers while I was still being a part of the A&R department, where I was seeing different song pluggers come into the office, and then I'd ask them if it was a publishing company, hey, do you guys got a studio? Things like that. So some of them did, like Warner Brothers had a studio. So, I talked to the song plugger and he invited me over where I could go take a look at their studio. And just the different dimensions of control rooms, the way some had lots of diffusion, some had minimal diffusion and just lots of absorption, different acoustic characteristics. The first thing I noticed when I'd start walking into these rooms, because they'd all usually have an airlock main door going into the control room, just like most studios do today.
Yeah.
But as soon as I would open that door, there was a sound you could kind of hear as the vacuum went, all of a sudden you could, with that door air sucking sound, you could hear different characteristics of all of a sudden what the room was. If it was a higher, thing, that I noticed that the room was brighter and more lively, the control room was. If it was lower in pitch and really low in volume, I noticed the rooms had lots of absorption. So little things like that, you just kind of start to pick up between the different rooms, the different facilities. And it was little things that you just kind of have an innate instinct to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Nobody was telling me, Randy, when you walk in there, you need to listen to that. It was just kind of things because of my enthusiasm and, vigor for learning it all and wanting to be a part of it. I just sponged it up.
That's cool. And, the cool thing for me to hear that and that reminder from you is Rockstars. This is why I started the podcast. This is why I created Recording Studio Rockstars, is because, Randy, you had that golden opportunity to be invited in all these different studios. And I had some of that too. And it was so cool when some pro engineer would say like, sure, stop by. I'll be over at, 16th. Have sound mixing a record, and I'd drop in and just kind of check it out for a minute. And I think the engineers appreciated it too. It's the same thing.
Oh, they definitely did. Those relationships that I built up with those guys was, they're still friends today. A lot of those people, and it's something that I think that has gone away a little bit in the Nashville community. It's not quite as prevalent as it used to be, but I think that there's still a lot of genuinely sincere engineers and producers out there that really still love what they do so much, and they're always willing to open their hearts and ideas and minds to people that they really know will appreciate what they have to say.
Yeah, yeah.
That's if you show sincerity in what you're getting out of from being around those people, man, they're just going to make themselves even more available to you.
Yeah, well, and that's why we say thank you for joining us on the podcast, man.
You
We
know,
appreciate it.
it's a neat thing, but it was the time at CBS really exposed me to the whole music industry in whole, because at that point, I was pretty sure, I know I wanted to work in studios, but yet I wasn't sure exactly what role besides doing the recording the studios played in the whole process of the music business.
Right.
As being a part of a record company, we had a promotions department. The art department was in-house. The marketing and product management was there in-house. So, I met and talked and spent time with all of these directors of all those departments to learn what goes on in radio promotion. Right. Back then when a song would stay number one, I'd sit in a meeting of the regional directors there in the office for different parts of the country and listen to what discussions they would have on which single they're going to push next week and why. And listen to the feedback that they were saying that their disc jockeys were giving them certain songs and things like that. I learned how important of a role that the promotion director plays in an artist's career, and working with the manager and with the A&R department and trying to choose those songs. It really showed me that it was a business. CBS was a corporate entity. They were there to make money and for their shareholders and stockholders. And so they made a lot of their decisions in most areas based on business. Mm-hmm. The strongest area for creativity was in the A&R department. I was fortunate to be a coordinator there. But a lot of times what ideas and thoughts the artist and producer and even A&R department had on a particular release would conflict with what the promotions department are telling them that they need to be putting out. And
so you get feedback from right from the DJ at the station that might say, tempo's wrong, it's too down tempo, it's too up tempo, stuff like that.
Yep. Exactly. Things like that. Exactly. We don't like the key in it. We think we
don't like the key.
He needs to be singing in a lower register. This song here on the album's got this song, and we feel his voice is a little richer in that, and that's what the listeners are wanting. It went from creative things to business things to it was a push and pull between all the different departments at times. Most of the time it was a symbiotic relationship, but there was times when there was conflicts and seeing the way they would get resolved, and sometimes it would come down to the senior VP of the division making the choice and decision on certain things.
Fascinating.
But, so it was the whole record company exposed me to all the aspects. The tour managers would come into town and they'd rely on me. I'd advance the show with them through, let's say we had it was going to be at 3rd and Lindsley. I don't even remember what 3rd and Lindsley was called back then, but if it was in that venue, I'd contact the venue as part of my job and make sure they had all the power requirements that the band needed and things like that. So it was a multifaceted job that I was doing. And I probably took on a lot of different things that really weren't expected of me, but those are the kind of things that help you get noticed, I'm going to say, and plus if I enjoyed it, I wanted to learn, okay, this band's coming in here, they've got 7 pieces. Okay, is this place going to have enough power or enough outlets across the front of the stage to be able to, push this band through? And, it's same kind of thing when you got a recording session going on and the producer's going to contact the engineer. And if you're assisting, the engineer's going to go, okay, guys, I got 6 musicians coming in, 2 guitar players, percussion, la-di-da-di-da. You go ahead. It's going to be at Emerald. These are the mics I know they have. So you as the assistant start, advancing it, go over, go over there and get everything patched up properly, make sure that the place has got all those mics. If they don't have what he thought they had, then you're contacting the rental company, getting that M49B over there for him that he thought they may have had, but they really don't.
So let me ask you this. It's very cool to hear you describe that kind of feedback loop process of the traditional CBS corporate label vibe, where DJ can feed back to the label and these meetings, and that can work its way all the way to A&R and production and songwriting rooms potentially.
Yep.
But do you feel like that any of that, like, are there places where you see that kind of happening today? And then also bring us forward a little bit to, how you landed in
Sure.
Tonal Park and Takoma Park.
Gotcha. Well, I think that there's still, similarities. You don't have as many independent radio stations as you had back then. And a lot of radio stations have now been swallowed up by bigger corporate conglomerates. And so all of a sudden you've got 2 or 3 main corporations that are telling their stations what to play and what not to play, and what to stream and what not to stream. Record companies still have the same problems getting their songs onto high profile streaming playlists.
Right. That's the radio of today. Really.
That's the radio of today that then they had, 30 years ago trying to get that song on a radio station. So it's a similar fight. It just is the gloves are a little different. And those are the kind of struggles that, smaller labels have to face fighting against a bigger label who's got more of their product on a particular streaming service than a smaller independent label like Oh Boy Records or something like that. And, and imagine the small independent artist who's self-funding everything, what he has to go through to even get his music heard, let alone try to get it on one of those mainstream playlists that are on a Spotify or a Tidal and things like that.
The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring the PFM HD1000 master reference monitors, I was blown away. It was like listening to 3D holographic audio where I could reach out and touch the instruments with rock solid bass down to 20 hertz. It was awesome. And now I've got one of my very own at the Toy Box Studio in East Nashville. What's amazing is that the Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room too, or even your bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free Introduction to Mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Now, let me ask a pushback question, because I've also heard people say things like, the moment you start trying to chase down what you think somebody else wants out of your music is the moment you fail in creating music. So maybe you've got some stories of that alternate perspective to this process too, where you feel like the balance really gets struck between the two different, the benefits of both sides of that story.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of little stories of David, versus Goliath. I mean, I think probably the most recent one that you could probably come up with is through pop music is, Billie Eilish. If you think about that,
Billie Eilish, yeah.
Billie Eilish. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I try to stay up with all these
That's all right.
new artists and stuff. But here's an artist that with her and her brother produced this album and recorded the songs in their home, and what they had to go through to try to get the exposure of those songs, and it was a struggle there. But look where the struggle paid off, and the critical and commercial success that she's had is a testament to the small underdog artist. You know, I think that's, you know, a good example of something like that. And it's, but it's hard for an artist as an independent songwriter artist to define those paths as easily as when somebody or a big corporation is behind them, helping them get through those doors. The music and the production and the songs have got to be so much better than a big major label production for them to all of a sudden get on the same playing field and open the same ears and get the exposure that they are getting based on being an independent artist versus a label person, you know. So there's, but the streaming services are where we are now, and that's what's going on with the whole thing. And different models, different games, you know. It's kind of the way it is with that. But you know, as I was in the label, all of a sudden I was going to the different studios. One thing I noticed as I was going to recording studios versus mastering studios. Big differences going on here. And as I'm sitting in a mastering room listening to something versus where I heard that same song get mixed at another studio, say Stargem. Back then, Joe Bogan was mixing something for Steve Buckingham. And all of a sudden I was in Georgetown listening to that Ricky Van Shelton mix that I heard down the street through mastering and in a different environment. And I noticed a pattern in mastering studios. I'd go to Masterfonics, big main monitors they were listening to. Georgetown, big Dunleavys. I'd go to Master Mix. Hank had his big PMCs, things like this. And the monitoring environment seemed to be much more full range and open in the mastering studios than it was in the recording studios. A different type of listening was going on in the mastering rooms versus the recording studios and in the mix rooms. And for some reason, I just always thought that everything sounded better in a mastering room.
It kind of does, doesn't it?
You know, and it did, you know. And so I got them, you know, so I knew Denny Purcell, I knew Hank Williams, Glenn Meadows, you know, at Masterfonics, and some of these other guys, you know, and some of the Randy Kling, you know, it was that disc mastering, and you had Hollis and MC at custom mastering. And so these different mastering facilities around town I'm going to and hearing things differently. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, you know, this is a pretty neat thing here. You know, I really like this. And then as the time at Columbia Records came to close, I went to work at Masterfonics as Glenn Meadows' assistant, and really got into the whole mastering at a full-time basis around 88, something like that. They had just built the new Hidley Kenosha rooms there. The mix room had just finished getting building. There was no Studio 6. Bowen with MCA and then next in Capitol Records had the mix room on lease. We did all of their mastering, anything that went through MCA and then eventually Capitol, part of Bowen's reign on those labels, that it had to be done a certain way, the recording and mastering. So if you wanted to do a record on MCA, you had to record it at either Emerald, Soundstage, and Masterfonics when we got the tracking room, things like that.
Wow. So it was sort of like quality control in the recording creation process as well.
Yes. You had to use a Mitsubishi PD format digital tape machine, and you had to
X32, isn't that what it was?
Yes, something like exactly right. And you had to mix down to a JVC digital 2-track, which was a video tape based digital 2-track system.
Wow.
So, and this was dictated to you. if you wanted to be an artist on that label and record with MCA, with either Bowen or Tony Brown, or even be an outside producer that they would hire, you had to record it under those conditions.
Well, I mean, it makes sense on a certain level because you're trying to create an efficient system. I mean, I'm guilty of doing that with my podcast. You've probably received a flurry of emails and like, hey, we're going to do this on Skype, and that's just what we got to use, kind of thing. But
it was extremely, just like you described it. It was a machine. It was so efficient. It was amazing. You had a schedule and you had to stay to it.
Rockstars, he's talking about making records now. He's not talking about onboarding to my podcast at this point.
Yeah.
Despite my podcast being kind of an amazing experience, hopefully. No, I'm joking around. Go ahead. Keep going. This is really cool to hear you tell this stuff.
But it was, you had to mix down to, you couldn't mix down to an analog tape. You had to mix down to a JVC digital 2-track system. And your mastering was going to go to Masterfonics. It wasn't going to go to Georgetown. It wasn't going to go to Hank at Master Mix. If you were doing this project with MCA, it was there at Masterfonics. So Masterfonics had a great relationship with MCA, and then later on Capitol when Bowen went there, plus a bunch of other labels and artists and producers there in town. What Glenn taught me was amazing. I would sit in those sessions and see the way the whole mastering process really worked. And back then, CDs came available. The CD was first released in 1982 or 83, if I remember right. So it was only about 4 or 5 years old. And so everything was being mastered for release on CD, cassettes, and vinyl. Part of, those were the 3 formats.
I remember you go to, Christmas time, you go to the store and they're marketing, a singles on a cassette back in the 80s. What about the basic question of like, well, what is mastering? How has it changed? Is mastering then still similar to mastering today, but just the tools have changed, or has some of the process and the way you would describe what the process has changed as well?
Well, I'd say the process has evolved, definitely, because as formats and listening experiences for the final user have changed, mastering has had to change and develop with it. Part of the things I was doing was cutting master lacquers and reference acetates that would go on. Reference acetates would be played by clients there in town, listening to their music for the first time in vinyl. And then once that's approved, cutting master lacquers that would go off to the pressing plants, and all of a sudden for a, 15 to 20 year period, that went away, vinyl. And now we're back. We're back with vinyl,
Are you like, I remember how to do this. I got this.
What is, though I don't have a lathe and I don't cut master lacquers here, and I'm glad we don't.
Right.
That's keeping up a lathe is a very tedious process. They're very mechanical and very finicky and very touchy. And so I don't miss that part of working with a lathe, but knowing what the limitations are of the vinyl format from working in it for so many years when I was younger, it really helps me focus a completely different type of mastering towards vinyl releases than I would use and do versus a normal digital online distributed product.
Right.
So there's I fall back onto those old things with tape and vinyl cutting all the time. That experience, I think, has really helped give me some of the longevity I've had in my career.
Yeah. Well,
I
have a question here. This one's actually sent to us from Justin Francis himself. So, and I think this may be part of what hasn't changed and what has helped give you longevity. He just said, ask about your mastering philosophies and detail-oriented work ethic.
I'm extremely anal.
Okay. All right, let's just put it right out there, Rockstar.
That's just, and I think that's part of what makes a really good mastering engineer and a mix engineer.
Yeah.
is, really paying attention to small details of things, trying to, I'm a control freak also, so, trying to keep my hand on everything through the process is part of that longevity. Like, I guess the best example I can say is I can't imagine sending out a master without listening to it first. I QC it. I want to check it out. I want to make sure that there's no pops, clicks, digital ticks, anything in it. But I could not tell you how many mixes I get in for mastering that it's obvious that the mix wasn't checked because the head's cut off. It may drop out in the middle of the mix. All of a sudden, a vocal part may cut out. And that's because, the mix engineer bounced the mix. And then after they bounced it, they didn't listen to it back.
Right.
So now all of a sudden I'm in and I've got 12 songs I'm supposed to master and put together as an album. And maybe one of them's got problems. And that's just enough to annoy me.
Yeah.
So it is very detail oriented and always going the extra mile and making sure if I'm not happy with it, you don't get to hear it yet. That's basically where it comes down to. So that's part of the whole mastering, because mastering is really about, it's a set of subjective ears doing critical listening to your project in a full range monitor environment, and it's our job to take all of these different mixes and create a cohesive, unified listening experience for the end user. Because, sometimes, the songs have never been listened to all together at once before they get to mastering, and all of a sudden now it's a chance for the producer and the artist to hear the flow of the album, the making sure that levels match up so they're not constantly raising and lowering the volume of one song, making sure that there's a kind of a unified tone of roundness and bottom end to the complete album. Not one song just having great bottom end, but trying to form and shape the bottom end on all those other 9 to 10 songs so they wrap around the mix and the vocalist the same way that they really do in that one song. And it's a chance also for, with that cohesiveness, making sure, for example, the vocal level seems to be the same throughout the album.
Yeah.
The vocal level may sound great on a song on its own, but all of a sudden, if you listen to that song in conjunction to the other songs in the album, it's not right.
Especially on country songs, where, especially on any record with an artist where the artist is a real focal point, the singer in the song.
Definitely. So it's, mastering, it's, I'm coming in where I haven't lived with these songs from, sometimes the artist has written the song and the artist might be part of the production team also. So this baby has been with this artist and producer throughout its infancy to now its final development as a teenager graduating high school as a full-blown mix, and they're really close to it. So all of a sudden there's things that might be going on in the mix that's gotten past them because they've heard it so many times, where all of a sudden it comes to me, it's the first time I'm hearing it, and because of my monitoring environment and listening to it in a critical way, all of a sudden something may jump out to me that, hey, you've got lip smacks here that, or something like that, or hey, something's jumped here. Listen to the attack on the first few notes of this guitar. Is this the way you really want it coming in? So I can offer a subjective idea, criticism, not so much criticism, but just ideas on what a slight change in the mix may change and make that song completely fall into the others so much more comfortably.
Look, I love using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the subscription bundle. For only $19.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. And just for you rock stars, get an extended 30-day free trial subscription at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscription. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version were they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so that your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or the computer back at the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more missed mix messages from the band. Phew! Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off for the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Randy LeRoy, joining us from his studio, Tonal Park in Maryland. Randy, you ready to jam?
Man, I've got my thin pick, and I'm ready to strum across those strings.
Right on. So jamming for you is busting out an acoustic then, right?
Yeah, that and my electric. It's funny. I put the guitar down for a long time. When I was in Nashville working at Soundstage, just different focuses and things like that. And when I about a year before I moved out to the DC area here in 2010, I started picking up the guitar again, and now I play it all the time, and it's a way I start a lot of my mornings. Is I've got a guitar set up in one of my mastering rooms, an electric and an acoustic, and I'll pick around for about 15 minutes before I start my day, and kind of helps me remember why I got into this whole craziness in the first place, you know?
Exactly, man. Guitar is how I came into this world of music, and guitar is how I'm going out.
Exactly, you know? And it was wild because, you know, when I was 21 and when I first moved to Nashville, you know, growing up in Central Illinois, I was a pretty good guitar player around that area. But all of a sudden, when I moved to Tennessee, I found I wasn't as good as I thought I was. I was a big fish in a small pond up in Illinois. And when I moved to Nashville, man, I was just blown away on the caliber of musicianship. So that's kind of the way I kind of set it down for a few years. But man, now it's a part of my daily experience. It's all been really good to me.
Yeah, right on. So in the context of that, my coming into the world of guitar, of course, was my uncle Tad, who taught me 3 guitar chords. I guess it was E, A7, and B7. He just taught me down on the porch in Ephraim, Wisconsin, where we do our summer family gathering. And so that got me started, which is why I'm doing a podcast right now. And my cousin, Thad, his son, is a big fan of bluegrass. And so I reached out to him when I saw your playlist as I was going to people for questions. So I got a question here from Thad Foote. So this one's a shout out for you, Thad. Thad's a fan of Peter Rowan. And his question, you know, somebody you've worked with, and his question was, what role does art and recording play in today's society? Is it changing? How and why? So you can tackle that any way you want, Randy. But just to give you a little ballpark for that question there.
Well, I think, you know, throughout the past year, I think that, you know, art has really taken a more center in our lives because we've been, you know, clamped down on so many other aspects of our lives. We're looking for an outlet, and music has always been an outlet for a lot of people, whether it's as a musician or as an end listener. So I think in the last, period of in this pandemic, where people have been locked down, it gives them the opportunity to, if they're at home, they can put on that streaming service and, expose themselves to the new artists that they may not have had the time to do, or really the initiative to really do as much as they do now in the past.
Sure. Or if you did have an opportunity before, maybe it was in the car and it was a little too treacherous to go searching for new material on your phone or whatever,
So I think it's helped slightly in the last year. I think the way they consume their music and listening to it is slightly changing, especially with the growth of the vinyl releases.
Yeah.
When I was young growing up, when I got an album, I'd go to Kmart, buy that album, come home, throw it on my dad's turntable, and just sit down there and put it on and open up that vinyl jacket and read. Whether it was the lyrics, I wanted to know who was recording it, who the musicians were, while I listened to that album from head to tail. Because it was vinyl, we didn't skip around. We didn't have that next button that you've got on CDs or on streaming services. So a song that through a streaming service, cut 3, that you may always skip by, all of a sudden, if you're listening to it on the vinyl release of the whole album, you're going, this is about the 8th time I've listened to this album, and cut 3's not really bad like I thought it was, like I would have initially skipped it. Now that I've been forced to listen to it as many times as I listened to the whole album, I really like cut 3.
Yeah.
So the way they're listening and consuming music is slightly changing with the new formats of vinyl. Well, I'm not going to say new, but the reintroduction of the vinyl release. And that's a good thing. I think there's one of the issues I have with streaming services is the lack of credits, that are shown. And, metadata and credits in the digital age are nothing but a thorn in my side. It hurts me. I'm not looking for recognition for myself. I'm looking for just basic lyrics. I'd like to even read the lyrics of a song, that I used to listen to on a vinyl record, that you don't have that possibility of doing that, of listening to it streamed, things like that. So I think that people's reliance on music is becoming a little stronger in the past year or two, because they want to help escape what's going on, all the other crazy parts of their lives. I think that's I think that's been good for us.
Yeah. Well, it's a great reminder though, listening to vinyl, that we were exposed to particular songs and unusual cuts that were on records that would grow on us, or that had some interesting story to tell that we wouldn't have otherwise. We might have just skipped past it because it didn't sound like a single or something like that. And even in the world of cassettes, driving on the road, listening to cassettes in the car, it was a little bit too much of a pain in the butt to fast forward through stuff on a cassette. So you just listen through it. And this must be countless songs that I've discovered and, grown to think were really cool as a result of that. And quite honestly, doing this podcast has been really cool for me, because I'm going and studying all these playlists of all these different guests on the show, and I get to hear new music in a pretty cool way, And so Rockstars, I encourage you to dig through our show notes for that very reason. So you're discovering all sorts of new music this way too.
I mean, that's one thing I will say to the advantage of streaming services is that as an end listener, it gives me exposure to a lot of artists I would have never heard of in the past. I didn't know where to go looking for them, but I can scan through a playlist that they've set up, or find an artist that I've never heard of, listen to some of their music, and then as I go further down the page, I see the list that says similar artists, so then I'll click on them. Then all of a sudden, another door to somebody's that I've never heard of has opened up to me. And that's one thing that we never had before. not with the radio, because when things were only on the radio, they weren't saying, "Hey, that's Eddie Money, and if you liked him, you need to be listening to Jay Ferguson." It didn't happen. Where in the streaming services, it kind of is. So it's helping me, because as I get older, I get more tunnel visioned. And I have to work at exposing myself to other artists and styles of music that I normally wouldn't listen to, because I think that's really important to me as a mastering engineer, because I work on all different styles of music. So I need to know how bottom end is going to need to sit on a Nappy Roots song in the hip hop world differently than it's going to sit on a country record. How's the bottom end, that, even though that's an obvious comparison there, but there's characteristics in each of those you have to pay attention to and listen to what's going on in the genre to kind of make, so what you're working on, it fits with the similar artists and music that this is going to be played with.
Yeah. So share a story about working with Nappy Roots. What's the story behind all that? The big album that I did with them was called Humdinger. Nappy Roots guys are out of Kentucky, and they'd spend a lot of time, going out on the road, going down to Atlanta, playing stuff like that. And the engineer brought me the Humdinger project, and song, what was it? If I remember, Good Day, big song on that. As a matter of fact, that version of that song here recently was in a McDonald's commercial. All of a sudden I see McDonald's and I'm going, have a good day. I'm like, wow, that's pretty wild. That's, Nappy Roots. But these guys, they were a hoot, smoked a lot of weed. and but they had great artistic ideas. They wanted to hear things a certain way. And Skinny DeVille, the main guy, singer and writer with the band Nappy Roots, he had been around a while and he's had good success. And these guys would even come through and just hang out with me on their way back from Atlanta. They'd pass through Nashville going to Kentucky, and they'd stop in and say hi. Right. So we'd hang out. We did another thing called, I think, the Southern Mix Smoke Tape, Southern Smoke Mixtape, if I remember right. So we do mixtapes that I'd master and the records, and just good music, well done hip hop, and I've got strong feelings on hip hop. I like my hip hop with melody and, song structure, not the same beat being repeated over again in a 16 measure loop in all verses and all choruses with that hi-hat. Are you talking about the modern kind of trap sound versus some of the old school?
Exactly. So it was the more R&B influenced in the hip hop that I like. But irregardless, the bottom end's got to be different. Sometimes what I'll do, it may come in where it's just too big and washy, where I may have to take and mono up the bottom end. I may run the mix through an elliptical filter, and from 150 on down, I mono the bottom, just so it has more point. It's been taken out of the sides, and it opens up the rest of the tracks in that hip hop mix to come through and play their part while they're not being overshadowed and washed out by a big tubby bottom end.
Sweet. We're getting into some details here. Love it.
Things like that, it's you gotta, so knowing how you want to go about and get that point, and force some of that stuff to come out in a hip hop mix, versus, and I'm going to be, I would be definitely more aggressive in my processing on a song like that than I would be a bluegrass song and then a Peter Rowan song.
Yeah.
Because everything's already natural and open with real instruments on a bluegrass song versus a pop or hip hop song that is, all programmed sounds, programmed drums, loops, and things like that. They're not going to have the naturalness and the wood sound of the instruments that you have in a bluegrass, recording.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the records in your playlist was Letter from Beyond with Del McCurry, Buddy Spiker, and Peter Rowan. Great sounding stuff. So keep talking a little bit about that, and maybe introduce us to who some of these people are too, because we need to know about them.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of the Americana and bluegrass world of players is phenomenal. It started out with, bluegrass started to take out big changes in the 80s and 90s when Newgrass Revival was a band that was kind of gave bluegrass. It was kind of a hopped up bluegrass. It gave it a lot of exposure to the real world of country music and pop music. You had guys like John Cowan, Sam Bush, Jerry Douglas, and these guys all playing together and making phenomenal music is great musicianships. And it's, and what the way I have to approach that is that these players know their instruments so well that they can hear the difference of if you've went in and if you've added a dB and a half at 2K, all of a sudden they're going, man, what have you done? I'm hearing more percussiveness in the picking and the strumming of the guitars and what was going on, and
interesting,
things like, so they're very picky with their instruments because they've spent thousands of dollars on these old vintage acoustic instruments that, basically when they stand in a corner and the instrument's on a stand, you can hear tone come from it.
Right.
It's just the sound from these is just, if they're recorded properly, is phenomenal. And there's a lot of great acoustic recording engineers in Nashville. I mean, that's the beauty of it. What I really love about that town is you've got guys like Dave Cinco, his recordings of anything from Punch Brothers to some of the Newgrass revival stuff. I recently did a project on Bella White for him. Things like this. His recordings are phenomenal. To another guy who's more bluegrass oriented named Randy Coors. Randy is a phenomenal dobro player and lap steel player, plays great guitar in that also, but he's also, because of his background of being a musician, his recordings of acoustic instruments are phenomenal. And his recording setup is geared towards that style of music. And Brent Truitt, another guy over in East Nashville, his little studio he's got out back of his house, just did an album on a guy named Jeff Picker, upright bass player. Phenomenal tone and recording of the bass, the upright bass. And
that's a hard one to do too. We talk about that a lot on podcasts.
It really is. Upright bass, even in just full band country songs, the biggest problem I get in from mixes today is the bass, bottom end, and kick.
Yeah.
And the reason this is because a lot of these recordings are being either recorded or mixed in conditions. They're great rooms with great gear and good engineers, but they're not full range monitoring environments. There might be a sub on those ATC speakers, to help round the bottom out, where the room may not be big enough to create the low tone that you need in the distance of creating that wavelength. So,
well, how big of a room do we need, and how big a room is your room?
Well, goodness gracious.
Put you right on the spot, didn't I?
Yeah, I'm going to try to measure. My room's over 20 feet deep and probably just about as wide.
Wow.
Because I'm running, my main mastering speakers are Duntech Sovereigns. They're a speaker tower that's about 6 foot tall, maybe a little taller. They've got two 12s in each cabinet, mids that are 10s, and things like that. So it's a complex, very inefficient crossover in these speakers, but with the proper amp, you hear they're capable of generating low frequencies and very crisp and defined high end.
Yeah.
And my room allows those frequencies to open up and to be heard. Where as a mix engineer in a smaller room, he's guessing slightly on that bottom, and whether his room is sucking it out or whether it's being too woofy, it may build up in there. If it's sucking it out, all of a sudden I'll get a mix that the bottom and bass is a little too loud because that mix engineer had to goose it a little bit in their room to make it sound like it was right in that particular environment.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's like we'd all like to be able to oh, hold on just one sec. Sorry about that, dude. I'm back.
That's okay.
That's my studio. He's building out the studio for me. He's about to go work on the dead room. And I'm getting, you would probably appreciate this, but I'm going through a complete studio overhaul, and Carl Tatz is putting in one of his Phantom Focus systems for me.
Yeah. His old studio, the Recording Arts, I did some work at in the late 80s. And Carl's a good guy. He's went from studio owner manager to now being a premier, acoustician or acoustician or something like that. Him and his Phantom Focus systems and stuff like that.
Yeah,
he's a good guy.
I'm so excited. It's going to sound great, and I can't wait to, be able to hear things just like you're talking about. Of course, one of the things that we'll be addressing is my room's not gigantic. It's big and hopefully big enough to do what we need to do. But we'll be compensating for lack of size with some of the stuff that the speaker system can do. The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, AdVision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. Now the possibilities of how you can use your Mac Mini are limited only to your imagination. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. But I do have a question for you. So you said something, speakers are not efficient, you said. And I'm no expert on that, but I seem to remember understanding that a lack of efficiency also means that the speaker dampens itself quickly or something. Is that right? So that you get a tighter sound in the speaker excursion in the low end, or am I getting that all wrong? Do you know?
Well, no, you're fairly close with it. With an inefficient speaker, it takes an amp that has a really quick, I think the proper word is slew rate, if I'm not mistaken, where the reactivity, the transients react just as they can get that, an amplifier can get that transient out extremely fast, and then also retract it when it's needed. It's a push-pull system, with your speakers. If it's inefficient, you got to have a really good, it's not power, it's efficiency. For example, I had some Bryson amps on these done techs.
Yeah, I had a Bryston 4B on my pair of NS10s that I used to have in here.
They sounded good, and the speakers sounded good, but I knew they could sound better.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing things, changing speaker wire and amplifiers, all of a sudden these speakers became very much more reactive. They became faster. A kick attack was faster and more pronounced. And that
does that translate to meaning that we do want a more efficient speaker system, or we don't? I guess that's partly what I'm getting at.
I guess. Well, I really don't know the answer to that. I can tell you in my experience, where I have an inefficient speaker, it sounded good until I really pushed that speaker with an amp that had faster transients,
right,
and could really couple with that complicated crossover in the speaker and really bring them out being alive and more reactive.
Cool.
So
cool.
I really,
if it sounds great, it is great.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's what I found is that I'm not a real technical oriented person. I understand basics of electronics and things like that, but I don't know real specifics of things. That's where, and I don't think I have to. I listen to. I use my ears. My ears is my knowledge of that. I close my eyes and listen to things. I A/B things. I'm an A/B-er. Just
we've been told on the podcast before that A/B-ing and that ability to do that and really constantly go back and forth on things is a critical part of mastering.
One thing, for example, I can remember lots of times when I worked at Soundstage, when I would sit down, they've got a mix up, and then I would go downstairs and listen, and I wouldn't be told what is the console output, what is this converter, and what is this converter. And I say, okay, which one is the original source and which do you like better? Or hey, you're going to have to choose between these two converters versus the console. Which one sounds truer to it?
Yeah.
And, 9 times out of 10, I could pick the source, and that's just really sitting down and closing my eyes and critically listening to the difference of the transients, the stereo image, the frequency response through the conversion, all of those compared to the original console 2-bus output. Because that's what you want in that conversion. You want what's coming out of the console. You're not looking for the converter to really color it, change it, choke it, close it down. You want it to sound as true to the source as possible. And that just, I'm very lucky I have an innate ability to do that, and just, A/B-ing things. And that's just, it's no different than when I'm mastering a song. When I A/B it, it's not going to do you any good if you can't level match things and, get them so, louder is of course always going to sound better, but get them so that the vocal level is the same in the mastered version versus the unmastered version, and then really listening to the difference of, okay, how does the mastering affect that acoustic guitar in this bluegrass song? Mm-hmm. Have I made it more percussive? Have I made it muddy? Well, I like what it's done to the guitar, but oh man, now there's a slight edge with the vocal. There's a balancing act there, okay, of how far I can go before something sounds good on one area you're listening to, but all of a sudden it starts to hamper something else going on in the song. So it's A/B, going back and forth, listening. And I spend a lot of time doing that. And I think that's, all a part of developing critical listening skills.
Yeah. I think it's one of those practices that I've learned to really lean on in mixing too. So, we think of mixing sometimes as making all these adjustments to things, but I think it's important to remember that a really powerful tool in mixing is the A/B-ing process, not just in checking well, one of the places to learn is, take the last mix you did and be able to, with the click of the button, A/B what you're doing now against that mix to make sure that you're improving upon it. But also just the mute button on individual tracks, like mute things in and out and A/B whether or not you're improving the music in your mix by including that microphone or even that entire part and overdub,
It's a big part of what we do. Comparing the songs within a project to each other, to actually one project compared to another project.
Yeah.
And I always try to tell my clients, they may come in and say, what, I really like it to kind of sound kind of like that Colin Hay record or something. Well, the first thing I tell them, I said, this is your record. It needs to sound like you and your production, not Colin Hay. You may like the way Colin Hay's sound, but you don't know the way that project was recorded, mixed, mastered down the road. We want to make you sound the best that you can sound. And if we do our job properly, it's going to still stand up against that Colin Hay record.
Yeah.
So that's, people that got, the A/B process really stepped into the mix process when we did get going years ago to the online process, because we had the level wars, the TC finalizer and the Waves L2 compressor limiter, what those things did to mixes in the 90s and early 2000s was, used mainly very distastefully.
Yeah. Well, let me dig into some how-to stuff, and you can either tackle these or you can just kind of guide us towards something that you feel like answering. But, making stuff sound good and helping people find their voice and everything. Some of the great voices you've recorded, Peter Rowan, Bobby Osborne. What do you want to say about recording vocals for singers like that? And again, I may be referencing something that you mastered but didn't necessarily record, but I know you've recorded a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
So give us some insights into really capturing a voice beautifully for the.
Well,
for
it's all about it being natural. When I was doing more recording, when it came to vocal time, it'd start with shooting out microphones. If you want to do a vocal, you've got to take the time to do it properly. Picking the right mic, and then taking that singer and walking them around the room and listening to the room you're going to record it in, and kind of say, hey, your voice sounds better over on this side of the room than it is over here. Things like that. Walking them around. It's no different than and you can take that kind of time when you're working with just one musician, or one vocalist. Find the spot, find the mic, and then from the microphone, takes mic pre's. We've decided that we want to use this, M49B for your vocal. Now we're going to check, do we want the Neve API, or do we want a, something else kind of flavor on the mic pre? So A/B those, take the time, because you're looking for naturalness. When I'm listening to, when I'm mastering records, what makes the great ones shine above the other ones is that everything sounds so real and open. There's space in the mixes, there's space in the recording. You can feel the vocalist breath because the airiness, the way it was recorded, you almost feel it just kind of whisk by your ears. When it's being played back, things like that. So it all starts with the source, the microphones down the chain.
Wait, do we need a good singer?
Yeah, that really helps, because it's no different than with singers. I've heard a phenomenal singer, or like say for example a guitar player. I've heard a terrible guitar player pick up a 60-year-old Martin and it sounds terrible. But I've heard a phenomenal guitar player pick up a Sears Silvertone and make it sound like a virtuoso instrument, because of their playing and touch. And that's no difference with singers. When I was recording most of the time, we didn't have auto tune. We didn't have any tuning at all. We had a punch button. Okay. And I couldn't tell you how many times as an assistant I was punching in a vocalist, we'd build one track from head to tail. And sometimes I'd punch in too late. Sometimes I'd punch in too early. And I'd burn the end of syllable of the previous word, but we created the performance. The performance was there. We didn't edit it, shift it, move it around like we do today. We didn't manufacture the vocal performance.
Mm-hmm.
So we may build 2 or 3 different lead vocal tracks that then later on we would comp from, but we didn't have tuning capabilities like we have now. So I think, I think a lot of singers and even some musicians have gotten a little lazy over the years because they know that can be fixed really easily. Oh, you can tune that. You can do that to it.
So let me ask you a question related to that, because that brings up a really important point, is that reminder that if you want to keep yourself in the zone of, whatever I create, I'm going to create it right now, right here, and we'll get it right this second. It also reminds us that you better be hearing something pretty damn good in the headphones while you do that, or how are you ever going to make that decision? Yep. So do you have some things you want to say about the headphone process? And I had another question for you about what you said about searching for a vocal mic spot, but I can circle back on that. But just about like making sure that what you hear in the headphones is good. Where are some things that are going to trip us up if we sort of set up our headphone and cue system improperly?
Nowadays with workstations, latency.
Yeah.
I think more so than anything, latency is the biggest issue in recording a vocal. Okay. How fast is your computer? What's the buffering? All this kind of stuff where, years ago, we didn't have, with a console and a tape machine, we didn't have the latency, coming back into the cue systems that we have today in some of the digital workstations. So I think that's a key thing you really have to work with and try to reduce to make it that it doesn't distract the singer or the performer.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. And that's a combination of your, converters and your software. You may have great latency where it's so minimal, then all of a sudden you'll get a firmware update to that converter, your interface, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what's happened? All of a sudden now you've got 10 milliseconds of latency.
10 milliseconds would be a little bit big, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just throwing things out there, but you've got, such a longer length of latency than you had. It's creating distractions for the singer.
The Toy Box Studio, aka Recording Studio Rockstar's headquarters, is proud to announce that it is now an official Phantom Focus mix room designed by Carl Tatz. Yay! The beautiful new control room includes Carl's acoustic lens room treatment with the PFM HD 1000 master reference monitors laser aligned for holographic stereo imaging and depth of field with accuracy from 20 hertz to over 20 kilohertz. I've never mixed on a speaker system this awesome before, and it feels great. I used to feel like I would commit to a mix, cross my fingers, and hope that it would translate to the real world. But now, when I dream up a sound that I want to create in the studio, I just turn the mix knobs and the Phantom Focus monitors tell me truthfully when I get it right. Amazing. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. But I've heard stories too of like, I can't remember what band it was, it was an artist like the Bee Gees or something. It was a vocal focused band. And when digital first showed up, even the early digital stuff that was designed like my Pro Tools HDX system to have a very low latency, that hopefully technically is no latency or you don't notice it, that the artists found that they started having trouble hitting all their parts in tune. And I think we've forgotten about that stuff. I think we don't realize how this latency that we've taken for granted in our accessible home studio setups is affecting what we can deliver and what we can perform. Now, in some other aspects, there's only so in tune I'm going to get with my vocals. But,
oh, yeah.
but I mean, there's a lot of stuff around that too that you have to experiment with to begin to discover. Like rock stars, play an acoustic guitar, hold it in your arms and strum it and record your voice singing along with that, and notice how you sound and whether or not you sound in tune. Then record the guitar and go sing in headphones the same part, same setting, same everything as an overdub, and notice whether or not you find it easy or a little more difficult to find a tuning for your voice in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, just different workflow approaches. It's fortunate that, on the backside with mastering, latency isn't really an issue.
Right.
It's something that, I don't have to deal with on a daily basis. But the sessions that I walk into, I mean, depending on which software they're using, one guy may be using Logic one day in our studio area, and next day it might be Cubase. And different softwares with the set of converters we have, function a little bit different when it comes to the latency issues. Mm-hmm. So, and that's sometimes, what we struggle with the Q system is minimizing all of that. We've even, we'll split. Sometimes if latency seems to be too much, we split the input from the source. That part of it goes directly to the Q system, so there's no latency there, right. And the other part of the split goes into our workstation. Things like that we use to work around and get around it.
That can be a good reason to have a console, is because you can actually hear your vocal immediately in analog coming to your headphones.
Yep.
As well as hear the playback of whatever your system is. Of course, when you do that, you're going to experience that thing where you're like, I'm hearing my voice now on the mic, but I'm also hearing the recording of my voice on the mic. It's little details, but worth exploring, worth knowing about, worth making sure you've got it set up right.
Definitely. And that's going to get the best performance out of your artists. And that shows up when it comes time to do the mastering. You can hear a nervous singer, in a critical listening environment.
Yeah. You just put the Nervous Farm plug-in on it though?
Yeah, that's about, we're going to put the anti-tremolo button on that and kind of get a little bit of that wavering out for you. Yeah. But that's, part of the things with mastering, that I really enjoyed and why I got into it so many years ago was that I could have more control of my schedule, number one. As in the recording process, it can go on for days and hours straight. And it got to the point where I was not going to say getting burnt out, but I just didn't have any more time to do anything else. Whereas when I got into mastering, I could define that schedule a little bit more to my liking.
Right. Till my podcast came along and you didn't realize we're just going to take up 2 hours of your life.
So part of that and the listening environments and some of the gear was, a little bit different than what was being used in the recording studios. There was more emphasis on converters,
right,
and EQs and whether you want a compressor with coloration or do you want one that's clear and doesn't color, and different. Right. The signal paths weren't as complicated as they were in recording processes and things like that. And,
right. And instead of having 10 to 20 compressors that cost as much as your house, now you could focus on just having one compressor that costs as much as your house. Right?
I'm telling you, the mastering gear, as soon as you put the word mastering in front of a piece of gear, the price just doubles. It just really does. And I don't mind paying premium prices for premium gear, but I need that gear to be reliable and functional.
Sure.
Nothing irks me more than when I spend, $8,000 to $9,000 on an EQ, and then within 6 to 8 months I have it, it's going off for repair already.
Right.
Things like that. I don't like things going in and out of my racks. They get used a lot of times on daily basis. So if one of my 2 analog EQs is gone, I'm operating at a handicap.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make sure the manufacturer of that piece of gear that's not in my rack that I need knows that I'm not happy. I look for support from my manufacturers. And that's what I expect when I pay that kind of premium prices for gear.
Yeah, it's cool.
And so it's just reliability and recountability. You know, I may do tweaks on songs, and that's why I've got, you know, everything is detented, you know, on my analog gear, so I can get back to where I was, you know, with my documentation a week later when I go back, and instead of adding a dB and a half at 2K, I only add a half a dB or something like that, because
right.
a little bit things were a little more percussive. They're like, you know, everything sounded phenomenal on that, but it's just a little bit edgy on the attack of the K's and the vocal. And so, you know, I'm like, no problem. You know, I look at my notes, I can bring this back a little bit or pull that band completely out, and you'll be liking it. You know, and the whole beauty about all of this is that it's so subjective. You know, something that I may think makes the mix really come to life, you may think hampers it. You know, all of a sudden it makes it a little bit too edgy for you, with the way I try to bring it to life or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's a give and take process. You know, the people I do work for consistently, you know, we've got that translation factor down now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know that the way that, you know, let's say, for example, if TW is sending me mixes, I know a certain way they're going to come into me. I know what kind of dynamic range I'm going to be working with already, and what I may have to do to it based on the other projects that I've mastered that TW mixed, and so on down the line. You know, it's different mix engineers have different styles, the way they mix and the way they present their music to me. And, you know, you learn what those characteristics are, and you learn how to work and shape all those mixes to make it so that not only the mix engineer and producer is happy, but the people at the label and the end listener is loving it also.
Well, it's one of the good reasons to keep working with and developing a relationship with your mastering engineer, is because now you have an opportunity for for you, a mastering engineer, or whoever you're working with, to get to know your mixing style and what your source is, and help give you that feedback and build that loop, you know,
Definitely.
that closed loop system like you witnessed way back at CBS.
Mm-hmm. And that can't occur when the same person is mastering it that was mixing it, and they're mastering it in the same room that it was mixed in.
He's talking to you, Lidge. He's talking to you.
You know, and I understand the real world factors and budget factors of why a lot of things like that have to occur. But I think that if there's any way you can get your mixes out to a real mastering engineer and get your artist or producer to forego a little bit of extra money, the results that you're going to get are going to be so much greater, and you'll really appreciate that was money well spent.
Oh,
because, you know, having that third set of ears, you know, being subjective and giving you feedback to your mixes is so vital in the growth of becoming a really touted and sought after mix engineer also.
Yeah.
You know,
well, I've you know, in my experience working with mastering engineers, I've certainly, occasionally found it to be a challenging process in terms of my needing to somehow communicate something or want to help push it in a certain direction. But it is always better. It always, in other words, even if I was challenged by some aspect of it, and maybe later I look back at it and I was like, you know, Lidge, I think maybe your mix just wasn't as good as you thought it was before it went to mastering. You know, inevitably I've had great luck, and it's been wonderful to work with fantastic mastering engineers like yourself, and the experience of getting it back and having it sound so much better is just so fantastic. And I talk about this on the show too, but I miss the days of going to the mastering room, you know, when I would master with Jim DeMaine over at Yes Master, or Hank Williams, Not the singer, Rockstars.
Right.
Hank needs to come on the show too. Shout out to you, Hank. But going over and sitting in the room with a coffee and just sitting back and hearing the record that you finished come to life in a remarkably short period of time and sounds so good on those big speakers. It's just so much fun to do.
It's, and it's very fulfilling as the mastering engineer to give people like yourself that experience and really open up their eyes to what the joy of what we get to do every day, because there's such a mystique and taboo about mastering. People, what is mastering? I like I said, I just think it's, subjective ears, critical listening, full range speaker systems, and it's a person you're working with. I think you're going to go to a mastering facility for the engineer you're working with, not so much the facility. And I learned that over the years from, like, for example, when I left Nashville and came out here to Takoma Park, a lot of my clients followed me because, we had that relationship and they knew that they could trust what I was doing to their music wasn't going to get in the way of their mixes, that I wasn't going to try to remix it. Mm-hmm. I was going to bring it to life. The last thing I want to do is get in the way of your mixes. That's not what mastering's supposed to do. We're going to balance it all out and bring them to life and give them that extra little bit of smile that they didn't have before.
How often do you have an attended session versus a session where you're doing it on your own and then the communication is back and forth through email or phone calls or that kind of thing?
I have almost no attended mastering sessions at all anymore.
There you go, rock stars.
It just, and it's not that I don't welcome it. It's a combination of two things. One, where most of my client base is, and that's back in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And so people don't want to, travel 1,000 miles across country to sit in my room with me, especially if they're coming to me either as a repeat client, then they already trust me and they don't have to worry about it. They just wait for a ref because they might have went through it before with me back in Tennessee. If it's a new client, they got my name because of a reference from one of my previous clients already. So if that person's talking me up, they've already got a trust factor going on with me. So, I welcome the communication. I'd rather talk to you on the phone about your project if you're not attending the session versus emails and texts.
Right.
I'm a personal guy. I'm very easily accessible. All you got to do is pick up the phone, and the chances are 99% of the time I'm going to pick it up and answer it because I'm working by myself and I can pause, So I'm always making time to talk to that person and to get the interaction that we may need to make this project move forward the same way if we were together versus whether we are thousands of miles apart.
Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free." Now, how valuable is it to attend a mastering session virtually through a stream? Like for somebody to sit back with coffee in their own studio, their own home studio where they mixed it, for example, and hear a real-time mastering process get streamed over to the same speakers they mixed on?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not a fan of that.
Okay.
I don't want you to be judge. I don't want you to judge and make decisions on my work on your monitoring environment before I've got it ready for you. Because
right.
A lot of times, even if I work in an attended mastering session, I may not send you out with a ref that day, because I'm going to listen. If it's an important project and if you've taken the time to come to me, I'm going to listen. I want to listen to it outside of the studio in other setups before you do. I want to make sure it sounds good to me, not only in my mastering room, but when I go home at night, I've got a small set of PMC speakers in my basement. I'll listen to it. It's like, and it's untreated room, totally untreated. It's like the average home listener's, basement, man cave, except I've got a little bit better speakers and amplifiers, but
yeah.
it's a real world environment. I want to hear it under headphones. And once I take it out, I may decide that, hey, even what I thought I was happy with at the mastering studio, I need to go back and make a slight change the next day again. I may go back and retouch one song, or I may go back and retouch all of them. And when I'm happy in my room and out of my room listening to it, that's when I'm going to give you a ref. And that's when I want to give you a ref. I don't want you to think that, the mastering is done just because you came and attended that day and you walk out with a CD ref. I'm not ready there yet.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
It's I like to, I like to really. That comes back to what Justin mentioned earlier on. About work ethic and detail. I'm anal. I want to make sure it's going to sound good. My car doesn't sound any better than your car, but I want to make sure it sounds good in a car.
Right.
My headphones might be a little better than your headphones, but I want to hear how it sounds under headphones, So that's where I think that the attended session is great, but don't always expect me to send you with a ref that day.
Right. Okay. Cool. Very interesting.
And that's just kind of the way I work. We all work differently. And in the same respect, if you come to me, I can tell by the way a mix sounds, from the sound of the individual instruments, the production and the mix, on whether you're going to really hear the difference of what sometimes I do or not do based on what I'm hearing in the mix. I guess the best way I can say that is not all engineers are created equal. We all don't hear the same. Some have better abilities than others. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times some of your abilities may show in your mix. And so I know that it's only going to sound so good.
Right.
And that's not being harsh on anybody. That's just being real. Okay. Right. A rookie mix engineer is not going to give me the quality of mix, nor can he get the quality of mix than a seasoned vet is going to get.
Yeah.
So, and I'm never going to be able to take that rookie's mix and bring it up to the level of a seasoned vet through a mastering session.
Right. And I think that's what I was getting at when I was talking about sometimes I would feel frustrated early on in my experience because my mix was still a rookie mix. That's where I was at,
But if you want to work with me over a few projects, I'm going to get, each time you do a mix, all of a sudden you're not a rookie anymore. You're an intermediate.
Nice.
Then we do a few more projects together and we've talked and we've worked out issues that have happened and occurred throughout your process. Because if I'm hearing, let's say, for example, if one song might be real sibilant, I'm going to ask you what you did differently than that song versus the others. I'm going to interact with you and help you build your process. And you may say, well, I was at a different room and I use a different microphone. Then I'm going to say, well, why didn't you take, you recorded it with that. I'm going to use the old M49B example again. You recorded it with your M49B at your place. Why didn't you just pack up your M49B with you and take it over to Studio B with you? That way you wouldn't have had that issue. well, a lot of, but so those are things that I try
Yeah.
to develop and
Sure.
help push the engineer to keep moving forward. So there are things, mixes and productions keep sounding better. Then all of a sudden you're not at even intermediate anymore. All of
Yeah.
a sudden you're an A-League Nashville engineer.
Right on.
You
Well, I
know?
remember getting feedback like that from Hank Williams. I had taken over a bluegrass record, and I had printed it to my 1/4-inch analog machine because I had a 1/4-inch analog machine. And I took transferred that and took it over. And he was like, "Did you this hit the tape?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Why don't you go ahead and print one where you just put it in input?" And I was like, "Okay." So I did that and it sounded way better. So it's
Yep,
great to have that kind of feedback.
and that's part of my role. The mastering engineer is the gatekeeper,
Yeah.
because once we finish, all of a sudden millions of people are going to hear that project. So if it gets past us at this point, it's out there for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's why, a lot of these people rely on my detail orientation and myself being so anal to really help make sure that nothing gets past them. Also, that's part of the role of the gatekeeper. It is being, finally giving it that final blessing, saying, "All right, it's ready for Spotify now." So
Yeah, indeed. That's
and that's
great.
why people, that's why people come to us here in mastering. Those are just part of the reasons we do what we do. And if your mastering engineer isn't helping you and providing you this information and interaction, I think it's time for you to find another one that does.
Well, let me, I promised I was going to circle back and ask you a question about vocals before we
Sure.
get to our closing question. But you mentioned going into the room with the singer, figuring out where the voice sounds good. I think that's great to hear. And that's a great reminder. And I think if you're singing yourself, you'd naturally want to sing somewhere where your voice sounds good, just like people sing in the shower.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
But then I'm picturing that too. And I'm picturing, okay, singer's standing here, you're standing here, microphone is on stand here. And it just sort of reminded me to ask, do we need to think about our microphone as the ear? Like how deep do we get into this? Are we like, your voice sounds, they like where their voice sounds, and then you like where their voice sounds standing next to them, and then you put the mic right where your ear is?
Yeah, that's I have there. I put the microphone in the position where I was standing while I moved around and walked around the singer. I circle them a couple times, and all of a sudden they turn around with you, so you see different shapes of the walls that their voices going and bouncing off from, and all of a sudden you circle together, and all of a sudden you find that spot, and you're within a couple feet from them, and you're like, okay, this is the position in the room, and then it starts with keeping them in that same similar vicinity, placing the microphone where you think it should be, and then going in and listening to it in the control room while you have an assistant, or at the time being, I might have been the assistant and the engineer's in the control room, and he's telling me to slightly move that microphone an inch forward there, back an inch, go to your right a couple inches from where the singer is. Let's see how it sounds there. So it's all about taking and matching that position of where you were hearing it with the microphone placement.
Groovy. I love it. And then just a reminder, I guess, I don't know if you want to add to this, but we need to be aware that mics that we're using, probably a cardioid microphone, and it's going to have proximity effect.
Oh, yeah.
And that can be a little tricky to really tune into, especially when your monitoring setup doesn't give you a true sense of what's going on with the low end. But I feel like once you get into a studio situation and you can begin to hear the low end more accurately, it can be kind of amazing to find yourself like, wow, I'm going to move that mic back a little bit. Now that sounds better than I realized before.
Exactly right.
Like
exactly right. It's all about taking the time and experimenting.
Yeah.
Eventually you'll get you'll get the hang where you always know this particular microphone sounds the best, 8 inches from the singer. This one sounds best when they're right on top of it. Things like that, because you've used that microphone over and over again with different singers over the years.
Yeah.
And it's no different kind of when I do mastering, if I hear a mix, okay, and listening to the mix, I already am going to choose which compressor route I'm going to go with. Am I going to go with a tube unit because the mix and the vocals and some of the instruments are a little harsh, and I want to soften all that up a little bit? Or if it's already a little murky and soft, the last thing I want to do is soften it even more. So I'm not going to choose a particular tube compressor in my mastering change. I may choose something else, so it's you learn that experience of what you're hearing on knowing which particular gear, microphone, EQs, compressors, signal routing that's going to work best for what you're trying to achieve as the end result.
That's great. Well, Randy, I've got a closing question for you.
Sure.
This one is hypothetical, though. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back in time and find young Randy, MTSU. Maybe you're taking classes, and you're thinking like, I want to really kick butt at this one day. Mm-hmm. And you say, "Listen, young Randy, your voice would probably be playing back off 1/4-inch tape back then, but say." Listen, young Randy, here's the single most important thing you need to know to become a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
Patience. As you're young, you want to do everything and you think you can do everything. And you got to be patient. Your time will come. And be ready for when that opportunity does come. Right. If you were patient and you paid attention and watched and were learning while you were in those environments, but yet didn't have any really say in what was going on, all of a sudden, one time, you're going to get that opportunity. And say, for example, the engineer got sick that day, but yet we've got a vocal session. Well, you've been the assistant from this project from Go One, so they're not going to cancel it. All of a sudden, Randy's going to record the vocal that day.
Yeah.
Because you were patient and quiet and you were seen and not heard and you spoke when you could be respectful and knew your place in the process.
But Randy's going to make you walk around the studio and find the best place for your voice first.
Probably, that's where it's going to start, So I think, because when I was young, I was really, I was ready to get into everything now, and I had a hard time understanding why some things wouldn't come to me as quickly as I wanted them to. But one thing I did learn is that all of a sudden it may not have came to me as quickly as I wanted it, but because of my patience and perseverance, it did end up coming to me in the end,
Nice.
So that's kind of what I would, a big word of wisdom there. If you're in a session, keep your, don't be on your phone, don't be on your iPad or your laptop, because you think you're bored. There's always something as an assistant that you can learn and be doing without being on your phone.
Right.
Watch what's going on.
Unless unless your phone is playing back this podcast episode, then it's allowed to be on in the studio.
Then it's definitely, turn it up, I'd say. Turn it up.
Is that freedom rock?
Exactly.
Nice, man.
But that's kind of my thing there.
That's awesome, Randy. Thank you so much for hanging with us on Recording Studio Rockstars, man. What a blast. And I hope I get to come up there and see your studio. And you're near DC, I guess, right? So Tonal Park Studio.
Yep, we're Tonal Park Studios in Takoma Park, which is Takoma Park is part in DC and part in Maryland. I'm about 3 blocks from the DC border here at the studio, and just 3 blocks from the train to go into DC. So,
so you guys are you guys up towards Baltimore as well?
Baltimore. I live actually in Baltimore, which is about 30 miles north of Takoma Park, DC. Sweet. So I drive down from Baltimore every day. And so it's great because I love what's on both ends. It's just a journey. I love my house and I love my studio.
That's awesome, man.
There you have
I'm
it.
up there from time to time, so I'll swing by and say hi.
Please do. My house is yours, and to all you listeners out there, if you're ever in the DC Takoma Park area, call Tonal Park or look me up on Facebook or the internet. Call me. I'd love to show you our house. Come play.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's what I was about to say. How do the rock stars find you? Shall they go to your website or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, they can go to the website, or my email is randy@tonalpark.com. And that's my direct email. Just email me that way. Like I said, and you'll hear back from me. I'm extremely accessible, always willing to ramble to new people and to meet new friends.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you again so much for joining us on the show. It's been a total honor to have you here on the podcast. And it's fun to hear you share all these great stories of Nashville and making great records now.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Liz.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody. Take care.
Bye, dude. Cheers. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Spectra 1964, Samply, Carl Tatz Design, and Isotope. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any individual plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to get access to lots of plugins. And sign up for your free account at samplyaudio.com and get 2 projects now. Or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months of subscription. Plus, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. Just scroll down. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.